Busy day in the NBA. We're going to dive into it. Keith Smith, RealGM.com. The day started off with the Knicks and Phil Jackson mutually, wink, agreeing to part ways. Carmelo Anthony wins that one, checkmate. The LA Clippers, who, even when the LA Clippers win, they're very Clipperish. They end up trading Chris Paul to the Rockets. So now the Rockets have 2 point guards, but it's not over there. They've made other trades throughout the day to get their roster up to about 20 players because they are trying to figure out a way to get Paul George to come to Houston and or have Carmelo get bought out by the Knicks so they can rid themselves of Phil and Melo possibly within a week's time. All that and more. Keith Smith joins me now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. And is that all that has happened today, Keith?
Yeah, I think that's enough for right now for what's supposed to be a quiet couple days leading up to the start of all the madness. We have not had a break since just before the NBA draft.
Let's start off with Phil Jackson mutually agreeing to part ways. What was the straw that broke the camel's back in New York, in your opinion, that led to a Wednesday morning, early morning shakeup?
Yeah, that's that's mutual, like when a girl dumped me in high school and said, let's be friends, okay? It really is. I think what the final straw was, he had restated that he wanted Carmelo Anthony to waive his no-trade clause and that he wanted him out of town, which Anthony has made it extremely abundantly clear that he is not going to do that. And I think the other piece was the fact that he even shopped Kristaps Porzingis at all leading up to the trade deadline. You put it all together, and it was just time. It wasn't working anymore. And I heard you say in the open, yeah, Carmelo Anthony won this war of attrition.
Yeah, now, that's the way it seems, except there's been kind of breadcrumbs all day, including, Adrian Wojnarowski sending out a tweet just about 15 minutes ago that said the Knicks still want to trade Carmelo. They don't want to buy him out. There were some reports that Carmelo was basically saying, look, if you buy me out, I'd like to go to Houston because of the Chris Paul deal. So it seems that this Carmelo and the Knicks marriage is still a little rocky.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Carmelo's not going to accept a buyout because he's not going to give a dime back to the Knicks, which is what the Knicks would need to have happen in a buyout, is they'd look to try to get off a little bit of his money, and he's not going to do that. So they still want to try to trade him and ideally maybe get a player back, but be able to get off his entire salary without having to eat any of it. So that's going to continue to be the stalemate. And I think for Carmelo, he's going to continue to say, hey, you gave me this no-trade clause. Come to me with a package to a place that I want to be at, then I'll consider it. Until then, I'm going to stay right here where I am.
Keith Smith, RealGM.com. All right, Phil is out. Who are some of the prospective replacements?
The name that immediately came to the forefront was Masai Ujiri, who runs the Toronto Raptors. It sounds like that's someone who the Knicks want to pursue. The challenge is the Raptors just promoted Ujiri from general manager to president of basketball operations, so it would be a lateral move for him. He's got a good thing going in Toronto, but he's been a guy who has historically come in and done the rebuild process, and then when the teams are as far as long as he can take them, then he looks for that next challenge. So it could be something there, but the Raptors are not going to let him go without asking for some form of compensation.
Obviously, the Knicks have been a disaster. Is this still an attractive job, or is Dolan kind of scared off anybody who has any credentials? Or do you think that people are saying, look, I can get in there. They have pieces, Porzingis. Well, maybe they don't have a lot of pieces, but Porzingis is there. Do people want this job? Is this a job that high-level guys are going to come after?
Yeah, I think people still want it. At the end of the day, there's only 30 of these jobs around in the NBA, so you're always going to have someone who wants one, and it's still the Knicks, it's still New York City. They do, like you mentioned, have Porzingis as a piece you can build around, which is better than a lot of other teams can boast. So they'll still have guys who will go after it, but I don't think the Ujiri rumors or hopes may be a bit of a pipe dream, because I don't know that guys guys who already have good jobs are going to be willing to leave those good jobs to go to the Knicks.
Yeah, that seems like it's a big mess there. Do you think it's workable? I mean, if you were an executive and you're saying, yeah, I need a job, of course you take a job if it's offered to you if you need one, but is that a workable situation that you think can be fixed?
Yeah, I think it's certainly workable. Again, it's the assets there. Dolan has actually been fairly hands-off with the basketball side. He has let his people run, some would say, to the detriment of the franchise, do really what they feel like they need to do, and he stepped away. So from that side, he's not a real meddlesome owner, but you have the pressure of it is the Knicks. They want to win, so you're going to have to come in there with some sort of plan to get this thing moving in the right direction sooner rather than later.
All right, that was the first order of business today, and then around lunch today, we saw a little earlier than that, we saw Chris Paul traded. How did this come about? Paul obviously was going to be a free agent. So how did they come to an agreement to send him from L.A. to Houston?
So it sounds like Chris Paul made it clear to the Clippers. They met earlier in the week and did a meeting, and that meeting was really designed around just a typical conversation teams will have with one of their own free agents, or a session of, hey, what do you think and what do you want to do here? And it sounds like Chris Paul made it clear in that meeting, I'm going to Houston. And if you want to get anything in return for me, you need to trade me there.
Wow.
Otherwise, I'm just going to walk away as a free agent.
In return, they got a plethora of players here. So, I mean, is this something that the Clippers were just like, hey, we'll take whatever we can get? I mean, were they putting their foot down and demanding things? Because the trade, it doesn't seem like I mean, they got a couple of role players, right? I mean, they got Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley. They did get a first-round pick. I don't know if there's protections or anything on there, but it seemed like a boatload of guys are going to L.A.
Yeah, so they got Patrick Beverley. He's probably the best player in the deal that they're getting. They did get Lou Williams, who was in the running for Sixth Man of the Year this past season. They are going to get Montrezl Harrell in the contract, who's a good, young backup big man with some potential. And then they ended up also getting a first-round pick. It's top 3 protected, which that would mean that the Rockets would have to completely implode for that pick to not go to the Clippers. So they got a decent package back. It's tough in that position because the Rockets, they have James Harden and some other good players, but the Clippers didn't want to take on bad long-term salary in terms of guys like Ryan Anderson or Eric Gordon. So in order to get this done, they had to just take back, what they could get. And that's why we also saw the Rockets make a bevy of moves to pick up non-guaranteed contracts today to help flesh it out and match salary for Chris Paul in a trade.
Including Philadelphia's Sean Long, who got a second-round pick in return. That was a trade that was made to try to, I guess, facilitate the next domino for Houston. So they've got Chris Paul, James Harden. That's not enough. Who's next?
Yeah, it sounds like they're in the mix for Paul George. What they can offer, that's a little up in the air. It sounds like it would likely have to be Eric Gordon and then some picks going Indiana's way. That'd be the best thing that they could send to the Pacers. The challenge for Houston is they're kind of out of assets now. So unless Paul George says, hey, that's, I would like to go there and start shutting down other trade opportunities, it's likely that it's going to be Eric Gordon and picks headed that way. And what ultimately happens there is Houston's not going to be scared off by saying, well, this guy still says he's walking to the Lakers in a year. They're one of the few franchises who will say, we don't care, we'll just make it work.
Yeah, it seems that the Rockets have come to terms with that team they had hit the ceiling. They weren't good enough to take over Golden State. So while we have an opportunity, we got Chris Paul, let's take a swing. Even if George leaves, at least we took our one chance while we have the opportunity now?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. They also have belief in their organizational structure that they can convince players to stay. It's the other advantage that they have is there's no state tax in Texas. So players can make a little bit more money on a contract there than they could outside. So they've got some advantages built in and a belief, again, in their organization that once players are there, they're not going to want to leave.
Keith Smith with us, RealGM.com. Do you think then adding Chris Paul to the Rockets, number one, makes them attractive to a Paul George or another high-level free agent who might hit the market on Saturday. And number two, getting another player, does that make them the Warriors' biggest challenger?
Yeah, I think for Paul George, it makes them an attractive destination because, again, he's good and he's a tradable player. He's making a lot of money, but not so much that it's impossible to get off of. So that's important. As far as free agents go, they don't have any cap space. They're not going to be able to go get a free agent. So they're going to have to do this through the trade market. And ultimately, does that make them the Warriors' biggest challenger? Yeah, it'll make it close. And what helps is the system and style they play is something that can be tough for a team to match up with because they play so fast-paced. They shoot a ton of three-pointers. It can make it a little hard on other teams. But the Warriors would still be a favorite, but it would close the gap a little bit. Yeah,
so how do you, Keith, foresee James Harden and Chris Paul coexisting?
I actually think it'll be fine. The snap judgment is these are two guys who are ball dominant and used to having the ball a lot. But James Harden, by the end of the season, and we saw this in the playoff series against the Spurs, he was completely worn down. He just didn't have enough left. D'Antoni's system requires a lot of his guys. He only generally plays about 8 players, so that is already a shortened rotation. And Harden was such a high-usage guy that it makes it hard. Now he's going to have Chris Paul, who can help with a lot of the ball handling in that. We saw it work with guys like LeBron James and Dwayne Wade, who are both high-usage, ball-dominant guys. They'll be able to make it work. And the reality is they only need to get it done for about 20 to 25 minutes a night. Then you're probably going to have about 15 minutes a night or so, 15-ish on the max end, where each of these guys is on the floor by themselves and going against second-unit players. And that makes it that much harder to defend the Rockets.
Yeah, I find it to be interesting, those two guys together, and then if they can get a third guy there, it seems that it makes for at least another team that you can throw into the mix, right? Keith, Saturday, we haven't heard go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to agree with you. It definitely does. It's what's important for me as ultimately someone who covers the league, but at the end of the day, I'm a fan, is these good teams are not punting. They're not saying, well, it's just the Warriors. We'll see in a few years. They're loading up because they're saying we're going to go after it too.
Right, and we were talking earlier in the show, in like the first hour, the second hour of the show, about how the perception is almost that the NBA accepts mediocrity. That so many teams are just content on being a team that catches lightning in the bottle every once in a while, and the teams that get condemned are the super teams. They get criticized because the super teams ruin the league. And the tanking teams, because, God forbid, they came up with a plan to get out of the middle. The teams in the middle are the teams that don't get criticized because they're kind of just staying the status quo, and that's what the league wants. They want these mediocre teams because the perception is you all have a shot. You can all catch lightning in the bottle. And the Rockets finally said, we want to get off the middle rung, and we want to try to get out of mediocrity.
Yeah, absolutely. They're loading it up to go for it, and they want to be right in the mix with trying to take down the Warriors.
And the Warriors, they have an interesting decision to make here, Keith. Andre Iguodala, his name has been all over the league, including where he was drafted in Philadelphia. Do you foresee that the Warriors are going to lose maybe one of their the most key of their role players?
Yeah, they're not going to lose Andre Iguodala. I know he's going to take other meetings. The only way they would lose them if they start to play real hardball and get real tight-fisted with their money. But Kevin Durant's already made it clear he will take less money than he's eligible for if that helps put a little bit more in Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston's pockets. They're going to lose one of the two. It's more likely to be Sean Livingston. He's far more replaceable. Iguodala is such a key to everything they do. He's a key to their small ball lineup. He still remains one of their best, if not best, perimeter defender, along with Klay Thompson. So he's not somebody that they're going to give up. I think he'll take some other meetings, more just to prove his value. And the Warriors' ownership is also, they're riding a high, and they're not going to be scared off by paying some luxury tax to keep this group together.
All right, a couple other interesting names to keep an eye on for Saturday. How about Blake Griffin? Obviously he was the number one pick. He was drafted there, which makes him somewhat different than Chris Paul, who was acquired by them. So do they want to let their former draft choice out of L.A.?
Yeah, they're not going to want to let him go. I think that it is they're now going to transition to, or rather than having CP3 here, and there's a lot of stuff between Paul and Griffin that they don't necessarily get along. They're saying Griffin's our guy. He's our franchise guy. They're probably going to give him a full max. What he ultimately needs to decide on is, have I gone as far with the Clippers as I can, which is what Chris Paul obviously decided. And if he says I have, then it may be up to him to go look somewhere else for another team. And there's a handful of teams out there with cap space who would love to have him. The personal opinion-wise is the Clippers should just let him go and say, you know what, it's time to blow this thing up. Let's rebuild. Let's do this the right way. Because otherwise they're going to be one of those middle-of-the-pack teams that you just mentioned that's not really good, but they're not bad enough to get a meaningful draft choice either.
Right. Then you look at his teammate J.J. Redick. Is he as good as gone? A lot of talk about Philadelphia. Is that a good fit for J.J.? Or is he partial to go back to L.A.?
Yeah, I think he was gone anyway. I think he was the one guy who was going to be headed out the door. I think, Steve Ballmer is an extremely rich man, but even he has limits on how much luxury tax he wanted to pay. Chris Paul's out the door now, but they still are, facing that if they were to keep the rest of their guys. So I do think the Philadelphia 76ers are going to make a serious run at J.J. Redick. They still need a competent shooter on the wing to pair with the rest of their guys. He's an older guy, but his game should age quite well, so he'd make a nice fit in with the rest of their talent. Then you have other teams like the Miami Heat, the Brooklyn Nets, who are going to have cap space, the Chicago Bulls, who could use a shooter. Those teams are going to make him big offers, and because of that, I think his time in Los Angeles is done.
Okay, a couple more for Keith Smith here. By the way, is your cover photo a photo of Sam Hinkie? Is that who that is? That's Sam Hinkie
at Summer League, wearing Michael Jordan Concord shoes.
I thought, I was like, is this Sam Hinkie in this photo on Keith's Twitter page? Do you think, by the way, where there's executive openings, do you think Sam gets a call?
It's only the Knicks and the Cavaliers right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think either one of those jobs are quite what he's looking for in a franchise. I think he's going to want to go somewhere maybe that's a little progressive in the way they think. So we might see him sit it out one more year before we see him make a return to the NBA. But I think with the way things have now obviously paid off for Philadelphia, I do think he is going to get another shot in the NBA to do things.
How about Gordon Hayward? He's probably the next biggest name out there that legitimately could change, besides the guys. Well, there's other guys like Lowry, but Durant's probably not going anywhere. Curry. Hayward's a big name that could be on the move.
Yeah, I think Gordon Hayward, with Chris Paul going to the Rockets, now he clearly has to get past the Warriors, the Rockets, and still the Spurs are the Spurs. They're always going to be there. And I think for him, that now starts to look like a mountain he may not really want to climb. And with rumors that LeBron James is potentially headed out of Cleveland in the next year or so, I think we may see Gordon Hayward say it's time to go east, and whether that be with the Boston Celtics or the Miami Heat, I do think we may see him leave Utah. It's going to be an extremely tough decision for him, but I think he's going to play the long game here and say, for my long-term future, it's best for me to head somewhere else if I want to win.
Okay, Washington was, one game away from being a Final Four team. Anything they can do, any player they can be connected to. We heard John Wall virtually saying, I don't want Otto Porter back here, right? So what can Washington do to take that next step if there's anything out there? Or are they another one of those teams that's kind of stuck in the middle rung?
Yeah, I don't think he said as much, I don't want Otto Porter back, as he said, I want Paul George. But, my dad always told me wish one hand, something in the other, and it's, so I always say with that is it's nice to want that, but there's no real avenue for that for the Washington Wizards. And I think Otto Porter is going to get a big offer from some other team in free agency. And I think the Wizards are going to have to just swallow hard and match and say, we got to bring him back, because they have no way to replace him if he leaves. Even if he leaves, they're still only looking at about $5 million in cap space, which isn't going to get you very much.
All right, Keith Smith with us here on the Sports Bash. Real GM, follow him at Keith Smith NBA. Anything else that you would like to add for the listeners out there to kind of pay attention to, or something that you're intrigued by as Saturday can't get here soon enough?
Watch out for the San Antonio Spurs. They did not get Pau Gasol and David Lee to opt out of their contracts for no reason. Those two guys left a lot of money on the table. The Spurs are clearing space to do something. We thought that might have been a run at Chris Paul. That's obviously not going to happen now. But they're going to come away from this summer with some player. And knowing how airtight things are in San Antonio, it may be someone that no one saw coming with the Spurs. They're going to do something probably early on in this first weekend of free agency, and they'll, to keep them competitive with Golden State in the West.
Keith Smith, everybody, check him out as the free agent period is underway. Even though it isn't officially open, things are happening, and he is tweeting about it at Keith Smith NBA on Twitter. Thanks, pal.
Thank you. I appreciate it.